We begin with a celebration of a life well lived. We're talking, of course, about former President Jimmy Carter, who passed away Sunday at his family home in Plains, Georgia, at the age of 100. Jimmy Carter's life was a quintessential American dream, a peanut farmer who ascended to the White House, a nuclear engineer who brought a plain-spoken folksiness to our national politics, a man so guided by his faith and decency that after a brutal defeat to Ronald Reagan in the 1980 presidential contest, he forged a post-presidency that completely redefined what service to one's nation and your fellow man could look like. This weekend, President Carter will be brought to Atlanta, Georgia by motorcade, where he will lie in repose at the Carter Center. On Monday, January 6, he will be flown to Washington, D.C., where he will lie in state at the U.S. Capitol and where thousands of mourners are expected to pay their respects to him. A state funeral at Washington National Cathedral will then be held on January 9th, where former President Carter will be eulogized by, among others, his longtime friend, President Joe Biden. President Carter will then be flown back to Georgia, where he will be buried next to former First Lady Rosalynn Carter, his wife of 77 years, in a family plot next to a willow tree at the edge of a pond in the small town of Plains, where they both grew up and spent most of their lives. It is worth noting that in accordance with federal law, President Biden has ordered flags lowered to half-staff for the next 30 days, meaning they will still be lowered on January 20th, when Trump is inaugurated. In the long arc of history, Jimmy Carter is many things. He's, of course, the 39th president of these United States, the nation's longest-lived president, one of only 4 U.S. presidents to be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, a president who accomplished in one term more than many presidents accomplish in 2, a man of service who dedicated himself to eradicating disease worldwide and to building houses here at home with Habitat for Humanity. He was a man of deep faith who taught Sunday school for decades, including while he served in the White House as president, and a man whose love for his wife is legendary. Their 77 years of marriage is the longest of any presidential couple in history. But he will also be remembered by history as a president who, during his time in office, approached the challenges facing this great nation with a quiet wisdom, challenges that are all too familiar right now in 2024.
The struggle for human rights overrides all differences of color or nation or language. Those who hunger for freedom, who thirst for human dignity, and who suffer for the sake of justice, they are the patriots of this cause. I believe with all my heart that America must always stand for these basic human rights at home and abroad. That is both our history and our destiny. America did not invent human rights. In a very real sense, it's the other way around. Human rights invented America. Ours was the first nation in the history of the world to be founded explicitly on such an idea. Our social and political progress has been based on one fundamental principle: the value and importance of the individual. The fundamental force that unites us is not kinship or place of origin or religious preference. The love of liberty is a common blood that flows in our American veins.
Taken as a whole, his life is a portrait of a man who represents the very best this nation has to offer, a legacy as a public servant and as a humanitarian, who is a beacon of decency, something his longtime friend, President Joe Biden, knows firsthand.
America and the world, in my view, lost a remarkable leader. He was a statesman and humanitarian. And Jill and I lost a dear friend. I've been hanging out with Jimmy Carter for over 50 years. Jimmy Carter stands as a model of what it means to live a life of meaning and purpose, a life of principle, faith, and humility. His life dedicated to others, decency. Decency. Everybody deserves a shot. Everybody. One of the reasons why we're looked to by the rest of the world For the bulk of our nationhood, we've laid out what our values are. You said what we believe. It's not just in the Declaration, we hold these truths to be self-evident, but there's a feeling. The rest of the world looks to us. And he was worth looking to.
He was worth looking to. In the immortal words of the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., quote, "Only when it is dark enough can you see the stars." In this moment in our nation's history, Jimmy Carter's life and legacy shine especially bright. It's where we start today with my friend, our longtime NBC News colleague, former Carter White House intern. Our dear friend Brian Williams is here. Thank you so much for taking a break from all the things that occupy your post-MSNBC life to talk to us on this occasion.
Well, hello, my friend. I miss you, and thank you for thinking of me, and thank you for having me on. I will take your cue and your brilliant opening segment today and call this a celebration of a life well lived.
What does he mean today with all of the turns toward darkness that if you go back and look at some of his speeches, he tried so hard to level with the American people, and he wasn't always appreciated for doing so. But what does his life mean to you today?
Well, a life of decency, of profound intellect, and I hope his intellect is not a quality that gets lost in the coverage that will come in these next several days. The author of 30 books. He just had this fiery brain. Studied nuclear physics, let's not forget. And let's not forget as well, in Carter's case, he was a decent man who defeated a decent man, Gerald Ford, who just simply could not get the film of Watergate and that era off of him. So this new young crowd from Georgia, of all places, emerged on the national stage. I think another thing I'm seeing creep into the coverage is that he was our best ex-president. And I have to credit Jonathan Alter, a bona fide Carter scholar and biographer, who appeared on this network yesterday in the minutes following word of President Carter's death, who said that appellation, the best ex-president, Carter found hurtful. He had no personal vanity, but he was vain about his reputation, his accomplishments, his presidency. He was proud of the fact that he put, solar panels on the roof of the White House before such a thing was even discussed in the public domain. So I think, yes, he had the best ex-presidency in the history of all the men who have led our nation. But to your point, the accomplishments of his presidency, his personal crowning achievement, the Camp David Accords, just would not have happened had there not been a man named Jimmy Carter on earth. And that was a calling. Let's not forget that his own sense of religion called him to. He thought peace in the Middle East, as a Christian American man, president of the United States, was his duty.
His faith was something he wore so comfortably, which you don't always see in politics in either party. That also makes him feel different from many figures on the stage these days.
Yes, and I'll throw the following hand grenade into this remembrance and say that the presidency of Jimmy Carter, his emergence as a national political figure, was the first event that exposed the political support of American evangelicals as something more transactional than I think any of us wanted to believe or admit. There will never be a more evangelical than Jimmy Carter, born-again Christian, taught Bible study until his body failed him and he was forced to stop appearing with his small congregation in Plains on Sundays. The evangelical community instead went with a divorced Hollywood actor. The rest, as we know, is history. And the second hand grenade is that his piety, combined with his hair shirt level of thrift, his flintiness, the fact that he was wearing clothing in his last years on Earth that had hung in the White House 45 years ago, the fact that he and Mrs. Carter kept an igloo cooler on the back porch of their modest Plains, Georgia house as an overflow during the holidays if their refrigerator got too full. He had no interest in physical effects. He had no interest in the trappings of the job, something he later admitted was a mistake on his part. He glorified the presidency to such a degree that I think that, combined with his lack of political Washington acumen, with his kind of lack of personal stature. When Jimmy Carter walked into the room, because he was shorter than most in height, it was possible to be at a White House reception and not know yet that he was there. Part of that is his fault. He ordered them to stop playing Hail to the Chief when the president entered the room. He wanted to get us away from the Nixon era imperial presidency, where Nixon had outfitted the guards outside the West Wing in ridiculous, though blissfully short-lived outfits and the like. Jimmy Carter wanted to be who he was, which was something very different entirely.